Believe it or not, this grey industrial town just outside of London is the final resting place of Pocahontas. But how did one of the most famous Native Americans in history end up here? And how much do we really know about her? This statue marks her final resting place. The engraving says Pocahontas, but that was just a nickname. Her real name was Amonute Matoaka, and her life was far more complex than the myth suggests. And the true story is far more interesting than the fiction. She was born in 1595 into a world without white settlers. She was a lively and curious child, earning her the name Pocahontas, which means playful one. Her father was an important chief named Powhatan. He ruled over a large conglomerate of tribes which became known as the Powhatans. Her mother was a captive bride from one of Powhatan's many wars. She passed away during childbirth. Pocahontas had 27 half-brothers and sisters across the Powhatan tribes, and she was her father's favourite. In 1607, 3 British ships appear on the horizon, carrying roughly 150 men. The journey from England had been unusually long and taxing. The ship's captains feared mutiny. They falsely accused one of the passengers on board, John Smith, of plotting against them. Smith was a highly respected and experienced explorer. The leadership feared his reputation. He was restrained in irons for the majority of the trip and was awaiting execution once they landed in the New World. But fate intervened. A set of sealed instructions to be opened upon arrival stated that John Smith should be one of the leaders of this new colony. Smith was spared from the gallows tree. The colonists choose a small, uninhabited peninsula just off the mainland. They set about building a fort. They called their new colony Jamestown after King James I. Within 2 weeks, they were attacked by a group of Powhatan warriors. After all, it was Powhatan land which they had fought over for centuries. They weren't going to let a group of outsiders settle here. But the natives soon learned that they were no match for the European weaponry. Dozens of Powhatan's men were wounded in the first skirmish. The Powhatans decided to try and trade with their new neighbours instead. They had one major problem. They couldn't communicate with one another. It was decided that an English boy called Thomas Savage would swap places with an Indigenous boy, both learning the other community's language and customs. Pocahontas and the boy became friends, and she became fluent in English. Now this cements her future. The settlers' living conditions worsened day by day. The Powhatans don't have enough food to share with the settlers. Since they're semi-nomadic, they only farm enough food to sustain themselves. Even if they wanted to, they can't share what they have. The settlers begin raiding villages, burning them to the ground, stealing anything they can get their hands on. One day, John Smith was chosen to lead a group to a far-flung village which hadn't yet been raided. A Powhatan raiding party found them and wiped them out, all except for John Smith, who was taken captive and brought to Chief Powhatan. Our only written source for this event is John Smith himself, and it's at this point that the lines between fact and fiction are blurred. According to Smith's account, Pocahontas shields the young soldier's head with her own body to stop a group of warriors from smashing his skull in with rocks. Most scholars believe this story is falsified to sell copies of his book. A fair maiden risking her life to save the man she loved was also a popular motif in medieval literature. He never mentions this story when he's writing a report sent back to England. And why would they capture him only to take his life later? They did meet at this point, that much is true. Pocahontas' fluency in English allows John Smith and Pocahontas to sue for peace once again. In his letters, Smith mentions a bright young Powhatan girl who teaches him some of the Powhatan's language under close supervision of elder tribal leaders. And this is the extent of their relationship. Smith is released and returns to England. The colony of Jamestown has lost most of its members to starvation and illness. They no longer posed a threat. Several years pass and Pocahontas, now in her mid-teens, marries a Powhatan man called Cocoam. He is a leading warrior. Pocahontas would have had the choice to marry as she pleased. After several years of marriage, the couple go their separate ways, which was very common in Powhatan marriages. By 1613, she's an important member of the tribe and still her father's favourite. She doesn't have the duties of a domestic wife. She's an important envoy. She travels between tribes, helping trade and keeping peace. She's in her late teens. During one of her trips, she visits a village on the far north of her father's territory, far from his protection. Iapassus, the brother of the village chief, welcomes her. He and his wife have seen a European ship in the bay, and they want to show it to Pocahontas. She goes with them to the shoreline. Iapas's wife is amazed by the ship and wants to go aboard. When Pocahontas shows reluctance and Iapasus says that she can't go, she begins to cry. The commotion is heard by those on board the ship, and they launch a rowboat with friendly intentions. They meet on the shoreline, and they're invited onto the ship. But Iapasus won't let his wife go unless Pocahontas agrees to go too. She agrees so that her friend can satisfy her curiosity. They're shown around the ship, and they're invited for dinner. The two women stay until darkness falls, and they are invited to stay the night. She's given a small windowless cabin, her friend in the room next door. But when morning comes, Pocahontas finds her cabin door locked from the outside. Pocahontas realizes she's been captured. The tribe which betrayed her had little choice. The English cannons were fixed on their village. They were at the behest of the colonizers. King James, refusing to give up on his colony, wanted to employ the same method that the Spanish had used in South America to quell the indigenous people there. Taking high-profile captives was his plan. New colonizers arrived from England, bringing fresh blood and supplies. Pocahontas is put in the charge of a priest. The colonizers tell Powhatan to return weapons that he's stolen from them in exchange for Pocahontas. Powhatan refuses. But why? Scholars claim different things. The British asked impossible ransom demands, or he expected the silver-tongued Pocahontas to sue for her own release. Perhaps he thought that the more time she spent with them, the more she could learn from the inside. Or maybe Powhatan just needed the weapons. He had to fight fire with fire. Losing his favourite daughter was a sacrifice he'd have to make in order to save his people. He had taken many women prisoners over the years, including Pocahontas' own mother. It was part of the Patuan culture. Women were sadly the spoils and casualties of war. You don't become the chief of dozens of tribes by being compassionate. During her time in captivity, she's visited by a man called John Rolfe, and by 1614 he declares he's in love with her and writes to the governor of Jamestown and asks if he can marry her. He agrees, and Pocahontas, like many women she had seen growing up, became a prisoner wife. 3 days before the wedding, she converts to Christianity and takes the name Rebecca. She's around 18 years old. She wasn't held at gunpoint and forced to marry, but she was forced by circumstances. Life as a colonist's wife would have afforded her much more safety, and with failed negotiations for her release, it was the smartest option. It would be naive to assume that it was a love match. The marriage brought relative peace and became known as the Peace of Pocahontas. The newlyweds moved to a farmhouse on Rolfe's plantation. They had Powhatan servants provided by Pocahontas' father. Later, Rolfe said, "They do run headlong, yea, with joy, into the very arms of the devil," meaning that Pocahontas and the other indigenous people living at the farm weren't exactly living up to his high expectations and Christian morality. But Rolfe seemed to be a decent enough man and wrote kindly about his wife. She gives birth to a son, Thomas. Then a letter comes which disturbs their domesticity, a letter from England, summoning the Rolfes to London. News of the unfriendly and violent natives in the New World has stopped English people wanting to become colonists. But what if they could be shown that natives can be friendly, learn English, and convert to Christianity? More colonies means more trade and more money for the London elites who have heard of Pocahontas and her conversion. King James would like to meet her himself. They set off for England and arrive in 1616. Pocahontas is invited to high society functions, some of which are thrown in her honor. Some say she's treated like a zoo animal paraded around in Western clothing. Others say she was treated like a princess. She's invited to meet with King James at a ball. She greets him with a low curtsy, just like she's been taught, and the Rolfes are seated close to the king whilst they watch a performance of Twelfth Night. They tour England, promoting the colony, and after a year, once they've done their duty to crown and country, they decide to return to Virginia. They return to London and board a ship. Pocahontas' health rapidly declines while on board. She may have already been ill before they boarded. She never makes it to the open sea. It may have been smallpox or the flux, any one of these European diseases that her body had no natural resistance to. The ship docks here at Gravesend, and Pocahontas soon passes away with her son and husband by her side. She was a young woman whose life was shaped by colonialism and myth, and it's very strange, sad, and surreal to stand here in her shadow.